Oh, this is a good one. So Michael, this was a comment on YouTube, wants to know, how do we expand the power of OSHA?
Yeah, this is a great one. And if there's ever a time that highlighted the importance of an agency like OSHA, which stands for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, it's now. And OSHA was created in 1971, and its funding and staffing has been cut and under attack ever since the Reagan years. But with Trump, it's gone to a whole new level. And under his administration, the number of inspectors fell to its lowest levels in the entire agency's existence. Workplace deaths have been on the rise. The former OSHA chief under Obama, David Michaels, said that OSHA has been missing in action during the COVID crisis, which I think is true. And Trump also passed some executive orders that, ended the requirement of some large companies to keep records of injuries and deaths in the workplace for OSHA. And so I think there are a few levels to this answer. And so first, in the immediate future, we need to stop the cuts to OSHA and dramatically expanded resources in terms of funding and staffing. But there's a flaw with OSHA that I think goes deeper than that. And the agency was set up as an attempt to respond to the dangerous ways that employers organize production, instead of an effort from the state to intervene in the productive process from the start, to eliminate hazards that are built into the production process itself. And so it's also relied on executive power for enforcement, which has also allowed it to be undermined. I mean, as early as the Ford and Carter presidencies, they were making new OSHA standards prove that they wouldn't negatively impact the budget and cause inflation. Or in other words, they wouldn't make corporations spend too much money that they didn't want to spend. And I think we can really see the limits of OSHA if we compare it to the workplace health and safety standards achieved in Sweden during the heyday of their social democracy in the 1970s. And so in Sweden, occupational safety and health standards were negotiated between the major union federations, the Worker Protection Board, which was their version of our OSHA, and the employer organization. And their Worker Protection Board had a lot much more power than OSHA has. Legal challenges by employers were not even allowed to their protection board. And so there were some laws passed in the mid 70s and late 70s that gave workers, the right to know about hazards, to supervise the operation of in-plant services, and to refuse to do hazardous work. And they also gave worker representatives a permanent majority on the health and safety committees inside the workplace. And so this all speaks to, I think, the broader point that getting true workplace health and safety reform is not really going to come through an agency. It comes through workplace power. And they reached those heights in Sweden because their labor movement was extremely powerful. They had over 70% union density. I'll repeat, 70% compared to the peak in the United States, which was 37%. And workers had the political power in the form of a Social Democratic Party or a Labor Party to pass those laws. And even before we get to the place where we can pass better laws, I think we can start improving workplace safety by having strong unions and enforce it on the shop floor. So the great union organizer, Tony Mazzocchi, worked with the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union. And so he dealt with a lot of workplace hazards. And he used to say that really safety laws were meaningless, even though he was one of the leaders of the movements to create OSHA. But his point was that at the end of the day, what you need is to make every worker an expert on health and safety in the plant so they can enforce it. So in the short term, we need to defend and expand OSHA, yes. But I mean, ultimately, what we need to do is build working class power so that we can actually start intervening in the production process itself to prevent these hazards from appearing. And that, of course, is a lot harder.
So two quick things. One, I read that Tony Mazzocchi was the one who coined the phrase just transition. And two,
True.
I think like what you're just saying about, labor power or like labor unions being kind of the heart of getting this shit done goes back to why labor unions are so important for a Green New Deal, I think. Right.
And on Mazzocchi, I mean, I just got to say this. I mean, if we build socialism, we need like a statue of him in our main city. He was an incredible union leader. I really highly recommend people read the book, The Man Who Hated Work and Loved Labor by Les Leopold about Tony Mazzocchi. It's truly one of the best political books I've ever read.
I feel like also what you just said was a kind of classic Bernie. Like, how are we going to do this? Denmark, Sweden.
Right. The millionaires and billionaires.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to the next labor poll question. So Another YouTube commenter writes, I work at a large agricultural company and am represented by UAW, which is currently plagued by corruption scandals at the highest level. How can workers fight huge multinational companies without the backing of large union organizations that act like businesses? The dreaded union business boss.
Yeah. And in the last show I got a similar question about teachers unions, how to reform teachers unions. And I think I'm going to give a similar answer to this one. And that is that you'll have to engage in a process of trying to reform your union, which is very difficult and it's a very long-term project, but there kind of is no shortcuts beyond that. And there have been some interesting developments in the UAW, which is United Auto Workers, that you should follow. And so in December, actually, the UAW leadership, which for others that don't know, and what the person is, referring to, is there was a big corruption scandal at the top of the UAW. But in December, the leadership reached a settlement with the Justice Department that kind of opens the door to possibility of a direct election of top officers by referendum vote in September. And so this could open things up and I think allow some reformers at the national level and the local level to gain substantial power. And a similar change was actually made in the previous interview with Ken Paff. He was actually instrumental in forcing these changes through. But a similar change was made to the Teamsters election process in the 1980s, where members were finally allowed to vote directly for their national officers instead of doing it through delegates. And that led to a reformer winning the presidency in 1991 of the Teamsters, Ron Carey, and he led a historic nationwide UPS strike in 1997. So all that's to say is that, it kind of sounds like a bureaucratic change, but that can lead to big changes in the union in a relatively short period of time. So I think, what you can do is try to involve yourself in this process. I mean, encourage your coworkers, other UAW members to vote in this referendum that's coming up about whether they want direct election of officers. And that conversation can open the door to, what they think is wrong with the union, what they want to improve, what they want to win at work. And that alone is not going to solve everything, being able to elect the top leaders. Like I said about, teachers unions, is that taking back your union might involve forming caucuses at the local and national level that involve members in fighting the company and provide a different model of how the union could be. So I would say, definitely keep an eye on these changes that are happening at the national level with the UAW, involve yourself in them. Beyond that, again, it's not going to be a short, easy fight, but there is a way to reform a union. Again, even if you think it's hopeless, it's happened time and time and time again. But it is a long-term process.
I got nothing to add on internal union politics.
It is interesting though, because UAW, I think some viewers will know of Walter Reuther, famous labor leader, was also part of that progressive labor alliance of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. The civil rights, March on Washington was like bankrolled partly by the UAW, and that was partly thanks to Walter Reuther. But the UAW actually used to be a really great model of democracy in the union, because they had so many different caucuses at their conventions. There was like 3 or 4, including like a really far left-wing one. Also, many caucuses based on race that weren't happening in many other unions. So it's kind of ironic that these days it's totally now been closed down. But I think, with these changes at the top that kind of unfortunately were forced through this corruption scandal, I think it could open up to like there being a more vibrant internal culture in the unions like there used to be. And, they've kind of, some of the unions have gotten out of the practice in it. Like I deal with this in my own union where, people have been used to there not being an alternative caucus, that like they see it almost as like you're a union buster, believe it or not. If you're like in this caucus where it's like, no, I mean, it's just like a political system, you don't want a one party state, that's a sign of a vibrant culture to have, multiple caucuses or multiple parties.
I forgot you're very pro caucus in the union.
Well, yeah, it depends. It's all case by case. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that is our last labor poll question for tonight. So once again, if you have any follow-up questions for Paul or any new labor questions that you have, go ahead and drop those in the chat or in the comments, and we'll get to them next time Paul's on.